Jonah was not a typical prophet in Jewish tradition. Most prophets would rail against the people with a sense of laser-focused clarity. They relished their sense of closeness that came from God because of their prophecy. They would stand up on their soapboxes and scream at kings and yell at the people with a kind of poetic scorn. But not Jonah. Jonah was a reluctant prophet. He knew that he had a truth to share, something that was invisible to many other people. But that didn't make it an easy truth to share. Jonah didn't know whether to run, whether to hide, or whether to stand up and share the words that he knew to be true. What Jonah wrestled with is actually not all that different with what many people of color wrestle with, holding experiences and truths that are invisible to people outside of their circle. Many want to share experiences that others cannot see, but they wonder whether it'll be worth it. Today, we're going to explore the story of Jonah through the eyes of Jews of color. I want to thank our Jews of Color Task Force for envisioning this program and for making it possible. I also want to thank all of the people who shared their stories to make this program. Some of the stories that you will hear will be shared by the people who wrote them, and some will be shared anonymously by somebody else to help all of us focus not on the particular person or the particular story, but to really dig at the underlying truths that we all need to hear.
At first glance, the book of Jonah may not seem to hold any lessons on race and racism, but as with just about everything, the story does not exist in a vacuum. Whenever we tell a story, we search for ourselves in it. Each of us bring our own lens and experience to the tradition. Once a year, a rabbi comes and speaks to our high school. It's usually the charming Rabbi Feinstein, senior rabbi at Valley Beth Shalom. As he was unavailable to address our school last year, a rabbi who was also a new parent volunteered. She was scheduled to speak about the importance of transformation which happens during Yom Kippur and the High Holy Days. Imagine a gym filled with 550 high school students and another 100 faculty and staff members. We meet twice a week for chapel and host guest speakers regularly. The room is mostly quiet as she begins. The rabbi, with long blonde hair and a Valley Girl boho vibe, stands up, takes the mic, and introduces herself as she jumps right into her prepared remarks. She begins by telling the story of Jonah and the whale. She explains how God asked Jonah to go to Nineveh to help the people there. Suddenly, she stops mid-story and switches gears, clearly begging to speak extemporaneously, as though she was trying to make the story more relatable to her young audience. Imagine you are in Malibu, she says. It's beautiful. The sun is shining and you have a smoothie in your hand. And then suddenly, God says you have to go to the worst place on earth, the most dangerous neighborhood. Imagine Nineveh is Compton. The entire room went silent. Did this just happen? Did a rabbi just say that Compton was hell on earth? Does she realize that that was incredibly racist? Does she realize there are brown and black faces sprinkled across the bleachers? People began to whisper. The rising anger and disbelief were palpable. The rabbi, not noticing the whispering, or students and faculty standing up and walking out, plowed forward with her story. More people left. Our headmaster and high school principal jumped up, looking fazed, and ran to the door to try to quell the trickling stream of bodies escaping in horror. Black, white, brown, freshmen, seniors, staff, faculty. We were in shock as a community, and she just kept talking, oblivious that she was the cause of people streaming out of the room. Eventually, our young chaplain reached for the microphone and tried to stop her. Our headmaster rushed back to the front of the gym and began apologizing to the high school. The racist rabbi, realizing something was wrong, stands up, leans into the mic, and apologizes for making anyone uncomfortable. She does not, however, apologize for what she has said. There's a lot to unpack here, but the main takeaway is people are often unconscious of their own racist bias, even good-meaning people. This episode almost ruined Jonah for me. For the past few years, when the book is read and discussed at our services, I couldn't shake the racist reading of the book. Today, with the help of some of my fellow Jews of Color Task Force members, I hope to reclaim the book of Jonah, related not through the lens of a white rabbi, but through the lens and experience of people of color.
Jonah's story is filled with reluctance and resilience, two themes that have defined my life. My Jewish identity has shaped my life and played a large role in my upbringing. From the time I was born, my mom made sure I'd form our beautiful bond with my Ashkenazi Israeli culture that of course included religious customs. I've always felt fortunate to have the best of both worlds. A loving mother who gave me the gift of being part of the tribe, an amazing father who is why I am part of the diverse Black community. However, this feeling of fortune has sometimes turned into letdown, reluctance, and heartbreak. Whereas Jonah wrestled with sharing his truth, I often wrestle with sharing my background. I've struggled to find resilience out of feelings of being too different and never enough. I find myself being burdened while at the same time being a burden. I've had to thoroughly explain my background at a bat mitzvah after being given looks of doubt and immense wonder. I have been asked, how could I possibly know the bride from Jewish day camp at my best friend's wedding? A rabbi once told me, I should start dating Sephardic men since we tend to match looks-wise. I often get automatically classified as an Ethiopian Jew or a Jew by choice, and although those are two great groups within the tribe, neither are my story. My reactions range from initial shock to laughing it off, and of course, in-depth explanation. The microaggressions and assumptions are constant. Each one chips away at me, and my fortunate feeling I had of being mixed. As time went on, it got to the point where I almost became apologetic in my tone, often beginning my sentence with, "Oh, sorry, I completely understand why you are wondering about me." I started to feel as if I was making their day more complicated, more confusing, and dare I say it, sometimes making them feel uncomfortable by my presence. In Jonah's fashion and struggling to deliver the message to the Nineveh people, I struggled with comfort versus truth. Do I theoretically run and hide from my Jewish identity? Do I mentally and physically separate myself from my people? The need I felt to be true to my Jewish being accompanied, yet conflicted, with the need to hide and protect my psyche. This mess of conflicting fears and doubts came out in full force when I went to New York City. Since there is a higher concentration of Ashkenazi Jews than in Los Angeles. I was worried I was going to be experiencing forms of rejection on an even greater scale, and from my own ethnic background nonetheless. When attending a meeting in Brooklyn, my fears proved correct. I wore my Star of David necklace, and in the presence of about 8 people, a modern Orthodox woman and secular Jewish woman, began to quiz me on multiple typical Jewish events in one's life, as if to see if I would pass the test. The modern Orthodox woman even turned away to talk about me to another woman in Yiddish. Feelings of awkward shame and desolation totally washed over me. It seemed as if I would always be judged and picked apart by my own, secular, Orthodox, and everything in between. I began to try to figure out how to retreat, but it was at that moment I thought of Jewish children like me, mixed Jewish children, who do not fit the stereotypical mold of what society believes Jews should look like. I suddenly realized what I wanted would be to stand up for them. After all, maybe the more who spoke up and out, the easier it would be for the younger generations. I gathered a bit of composure and said, I think about losing 6 million in the Shoah. We should be excited to have as many Jews as possible, versus scaring them off through interrogation or cold shoulders. My line was direct. I had no idea what reactions would come from it. I look back on it, and although this may sound self-righteous, I believe it needed to be put out into the room. Drawing parallel with Jonah, conquering his struggle to pick himself up off the beach after being spit out by the whale, and speak his prophecy as a proud member of the tribe. It's important for me to speak up and also speak out freely, no matter the reluctance or fear.
Jonah did not exactly embrace his role as a prophet. When God instructed him to go to Nineveh and to tell the people that they were about to be destroyed because they had abandoned God, Jonah picked himself up, turned around, and went the opposite direction. He went straight to the port of Jaffa, he got on a ship, and he sailed away as far as possible. Why? Why would Jonah run from God? Well, he understood something that was true of what happened to most prophets, that at best, they were ignored. At worst, they were ridiculed, marginalized, and cast aside. Jonah didn't want that fate. Yes, he knew that there was a truth that needed to be shared, but that truth was invisible to most other people. It was a truth that most people didn't want to see. And so, rather than go forward and share that truth, he ran the opposite direction. Just imagine the amount of courage and resilience and strength it actually takes for you to say something that other people don't want to hear.
I understand why Jonah ran away. Why he got into a ship in Jaffa instead of traveling to Nineveh with a message from God. He didn't think that people would believe him. He was afraid of being marginalized, shamed, and ignored. I know this feeling. When I first embraced Judaism, I was filled with so much joy and so much optimism. But I was met with microaggressions and racism. I never thought that so many people would question my authenticity as a Jewish woman because of the color of my skin. I am completely two things: a West African American woman, and I am Jewish. Only one of those things acknowledges me actively and consistently, and that is my African ancestry. But my Jewishness is always called into question, no matter where I go. During my Judaism classes, I began to feel exhausted and devalued. We had to attend many events at different synagogues. It didn't matter which Jewish space I was in. There was always a gatekeeper there to interrogate me, asking me those same annoying questions. Why are you here? Who invited you? Are you lost? Can I help you? Or I would receive those unnerving stares where people will go out of their way to make me feel so uncomfortable and so unwelcome. One of the worst experiences that I had while taking my class was I was told by the instructor that my home could not be used for a fundraiser because a family member of the instructor would not feel comfortable attending because she did not like blacks. The racism was that explicit. On another occasion, I attended an event. This time I brought a guest with me. There was someone there taking photos. The instructor approached me and asked, "May I use your photo on our organization's website?" Before I could answer, a woman interrupted, and she said, "Absolutely not." I later found out this was the same woman who denied my home use She said, use her photo instead, while pointing to my friend, who happened to be white. She then went and took the instructor aside and said, why would you use her photo? She doesn't represent who we are. I interpreted this as her wanting to portray an image that all Jews were white or light. Otherwise, why would she want to use my friend's photo, who wasn't even affiliated with our class at the time? I met with the instructor after this, and I asked him, why am I being interrogated by all these gatekeepers? And I also shared with him there was so much microaggressions in every Jewish space. And I went on to say, I thought Shabbat was a time for family, worship, and community. I feel as though when I attend Shabbat that I have to arm myself for battle. I also shared my high holiday first experience with him. I thought I was walking into a place where I would worship, a place for atonement, a place for solace. Instead of walking into a sanctuary, I felt as though I had walked into one of those exclusive country clubs where they did not allow people of color. It didn't matter if I had a ticket. I first had to submit to the gatekeeper's interrogation, and then my ticket was taken. These microaggressions also happen outside of non-Jewish spaces, where people think it's okay to make anti-Semitic comments in my presence because they don't consider you as being a real Jew. It's really sad that in non-Jewish spaces and Jewish spaces, I am made to feel invisible. After sharing all these experiences with my instructor, his reply was, well, this is going to happen. Because to them, you're an outsider. And besides, most blacks don't even embrace Judaism. After that comment, I quit. But I had vowed to keep my deep commitment to Judaism, and I completed my classes one-on-one with a wonderful rabbi here at Temple Emmanuel. I became a congregant, and I thought things would be totally different. But this synagogue has gatekeepers too. There are still those unnerving stares, unwelcome questions about my Jewishness, and bag checks that don't happen for others but happens for me. It's exhausting. There have been many nights when I have driven home from Shabbat with tears in my eyes, and at one point I quit. I stopped coming. But I sometimes wonder if the good I receive from Judaism outweighs the alienation I receive in so many Jewish bases. I know how Jonah felt when he ran away with the mission from God. But I have gathered up all my strength and I've pushed through. And I know that I can help the Jewish community become a better version of itself and pave the way for other Jews of color, because all Jews matter.
Jonah found the inner strength to share his truth with a little help from God, and of course, the big fish. After falling overboard into the sea off of the ship, the giant fish swallowed him up, held him in his stomach for days, and then spit him up on the shore. Jonah took that as a sign that he wasn't going to be able to escape his duty of prophecy. So he picked himself up. He walked straight to Nineveh. Now, this was a city unlike any other in the ancient world. It took 3 days to walk across the entire thing. And Jonah shared the shortest and most concise prophecy in all of our ancient tradition. 40 days more, and Nineveh will be destroyed. That's it. No fire, no brimstone, just the pure, unadulterated truth that Nineveh was on the verge of destruction. He did what he came to do, to share his truth. Now what happened next? That was up to the people to decide what they wanted to do.
Once Jonah shared his message with Nineveh, he found a spot on a hill overlooking the city to see what happened. Much to his surprise, his words mattered. The people repented for their bad actions. They actually changed. Jonah realized that people can change. Declined. Invalid social security number. This was a letter response from the free application for federal student aid, FAFSA, I received. Every high school graduate looks forward to filling out this form in hopes of getting help paying for their favorite college of choice. I didn't understand what that letter meant by invalid social security number. This is how I had to find out that I was undocumented. It was like someone had put the brakes on my life, and suddenly I felt like an outcast. Being an immigrant was not something that we discussed at home, let alone in school or anywhere else for that matter. It was just part of my identity, one part of my identity. I also am a daughter, sister, friend, and wife. I knew that I had been born in Mexico, but I didn't know how I had come here. I just knew that this was my home. This would be the beginning of my struggles. While my friends were getting their driver's licenses and going off to college, I wasn't. I couldn't even apply for a decent job, open a bank account, apply for a credit card, let alone drive. I was even denied entrance into a nightclub once because I did not have a proper government-issued ID. It was the most humiliating moments of my life. Everything was always harder and stressful, and I didn't understand why it was my fault. The worst part was that I couldn't share this with anyone. I had to suffer in silence. It wouldn't be until my 26th birthday when President Obama issued an executive order to extend protections to people like myself. I cried. I felt like the prison that had enclosed me my whole life was falling away. I was able to breathe a little better. Not only that, but I found out that there were now programs that were helping students like me with financial aid. Once I enrolled in school, almost 10 years after high school, I finally met other students who did not look like me, but were also undocumented like me. I had this misconception that only Mexicans were illegally here. I was wrong. I met people from everywhere, from Africa, Canada, Asia, Europe, you name it, all DACA recipients. After years of silence and hiding, like the prophet Jonah, I felt like I could no longer hide this part of me, and I had to speak up. I had to stand up for myself and the rest of the DACA community. People needed to know that we existed. While reluctant at first, I found hope in my DACA family and the friends that were empathic after sharing my story with them. Sharing my story did make me vulnerable to those who stand against immigration reform, but I didn't care anymore. I could no longer hide who I am because others disagreed with something that I had no part in doing. We are people with stories, not an abstract policy debate. It was getting our stories out which has developed public opinion, and thankfully, the response has been filled with a lot of supporters, something that I would have never guessed could happen. Because me and my fellow DACA recipients chose to speak up and share our message with society, society has changed. DACA did not solve all of my problems, but it has allowed me to embark on a more normal life. Because of DACA, I have been able to work doing things that I love. I can go to college. I opened up my own bank account. I have a driver's license. I have a California state ID. And I am no longer afraid of being asked for my identification when I go out. For much of the last 30 years, I have lived in fear and shame. A fear that at times feels overwhelming and paralyzing. Nevertheless, I am determined to live a meaningful life despite my status. While being an undocumented immigrant may have caused me 26 years of setbacks, it has been my drive and ambition to persevere that has allowed me to be where I am now. I am a student at UCLA and the first in my family to go to college, something that seemed unimaginable. I'm not done using my voice, and I will continue to speak my truth. And I know that the day that I can live without the fear of being deported will be the greatest day of my life. The one thing that I don't understand about Jonah is that he was upset when his prophecy made people change. He expected to be disappointed. In my case, I was delighted. My experience in the Jewish community has been a positive one. I have been received with open arms, and not only have I felt welcomed, but I have been, more importantly, seen by certain people, and that means a lot to me. People's reactions gave me hope.
I think that Jonah was shocked that people actually listened to his prophecy. He had expected to be treated just like every other prophet, to be ignored and discarded. So when people actually heard and heeded his words, he didn't know how to react. I think for us, it's probably hard to imagine that the entire world can turn around simply by hearing a few stories. But I don't think that it's so ludicrous that the stories that we've heard today can begin to crack our hearts open, can begin to transform us, to help us do the reflection and the repentance that maybe we've been avoiding for too long. I want to thank the Jews of Color Task Force and to everybody who shared their stories with us today for helping us to see truths that we might not otherwise have insight into. Thank you for your honesty and your openness. As we enter these final hours of Yom Kippur, I hope that we can draw inspiration from their reflections to inform our own.